In 2024, Japan welcomed nearly 38 million tourists from all over the world. The boom in Japanese tourism has been fueled by the declining value of the Japanese yen, which was trending at a 40-year low compared to the US dollar in 2024. As you might imagine, the rising and often ridiculous number of tourists has had a major impact on Japanese culture and Japanese people. Some people say that it's for the better, and some people say that it's really for the worse. In this video, I want to talk to you about the truth about what it really feels like to live in Japan in 2025, especially after living in Lima, Peru, while highlighting 5 of the most shocking differences I've experienced since living here in Japan. So let's start off by talking about what I would consider to be the most shocking difference between living in Japan and living in Peru. And that has to do with the sheer number of people that live in the city of Tokyo. So as you might imagine, the number of people living in Tokyo is extreme. There are so many people working, living, touring Tokyo that it's absolutely overwhelming. So you might have seen many movies, many YouTube videos depicting large crowds of people in Japan in general, but it is a very different story when you have an opportunity to see those crowds in person and walk among all of those people. So unlike my time in Lima, Peru, which I consider to be a very peaceful time, even though I had to deal with crowds sometimes because Lima is a major city, there's absolutely no comparison between the two. A really clear example of this shocking difference is a place that I visited not too long ago called Shibuya Crossing. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I may not. At this particular crossing, there are at least 3,000 to 6,000 people crossing the street at the same time. Although this area is pretty reminiscent of Times Square in New York City, to me, it was Times Square on steroids. What do I mean by that? Well, it was Times Square times 1,000, in my opinion, meaning there were more stores, there were more restaurants, there were more people, and the vibe was way more intense. And please don't let me forget to mention that there was way more music than you would hear in Times Square. So although I really enjoyed my time in Shibuya Crossing and I would recommend it to anyone who's thinking about visiting Japan, I do feel like it can be extremely overwhelming for someone like me who came here from Lima, Peru, which is a major city with a lot of people. There's just no comparison between the population of Lima, Peru, and the population or tourist boom that you will witness here in Japan, and specifically Tokyo. So because there's so many people, a lot of people recommend that when visiting Japan that you just skip Tokyo altogether. I would highly disagree with that idea. I really do not think that you should come to Japan and skip Tokyo. The major reason why is if we do a comparison between Japan and the United States, I would never advise someone to skip visiting New York City when they come to the United States, simply because it's a large, busy city with a lot of people. I don't think you've actually visited the United States unless you have visited New York City, because it is a staple in the United States culture. I feel the same thing is true about Japan. You really haven't been to Japan unless you have experienced Tokyo first. Now, after you've experienced Tokyo, you obviously can go to other places and visit other towns, other cities, but I do believe that you should start your tour right here in Tokyo. So the second shocking difference between living here in Japan and living in Lima, Peru has to do with the cost of living. So I mentioned to you in my previous video that I'll link here that the prices in Japan are much more expensive than Peru. The prices in Japan are even more expensive than a lot of the prices in the United States. The specific things that are more expensive are things like restaurants. The restaurants here are very expensive, especially in the tourist areas. And a lot of times, if you want to eat at those restaurants, although the food is very good, you're going to pay even more money than what you would pay for a restaurant in New York City. And you think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. Another huge difference has to do with the fact that Japan is famous for its micro or mini apartments. These apartments are very small, but they still come at a high price depending on the area that you live in. So Japan also has things like financial districts. In these financial districts, although you might live in a mini apartment, you're going to pay $1,000, $2,000, sometimes $3,000 or more to live in these financial districts. So that has been a shocking and compelling difference between the life that I was able to live in Lima, Peru, and the life that I'm living here in Tokyo. The apartment that I'm in now costs about $2,000 a month, which is an extreme difference from what I was paying in Lima, Peru, which was $850 per month. The third shocking difference, which is actually positively shocking, has to do with the extremely high level of safety. Japan is absolutely the most safe place that I've ever lived. It's safer than any place in Latin America. It's safer than any place in North America. And it's really a shocking difference. You never worry about safety ever. You can go out at night and expect to return without having any problems. Now, I'm not saying that crime doesn't exist in Japan, not at all. What I'm saying is it's much less prevalent and you're much less likely to fall victim to crimes that we are used to seeing in the United States, in Latin America, in other parts of the world, such as robbery, rape, murder. Those things exist here, but in very small numbers. So that is a shocking difference between my time in Latin America, not only Peru, but also my time in the United States. Japan is one of the safest places to live in the world, and you feel that as soon as you hop off of the plane. So the fourth most shocking difference between my time in Lima, Peru, and my time here in Tokyo, Japan, has to do with the technological infusion or the technological boom that you often see infused into the culture here. So I mentioned to you in some of my previous videos about Lima, some of the most exciting moments that I had in Lima had to do with exploring things that were old and ancient, like Machu Picchu, and having an opportunity to visit things that were shaped in the past, things that were old and established. But here in Japan, a lot of the things that you get to tour and experience have more to do with modernization and the technological boom that is occurring in Japan right now. For example, I had an opportunity to visit a restaurant where all of the waiters were robots. Now, that is not something that I saw during my time in Peru, and it is a very big cultural difference that you won't see in most Latin American countries. So I think the technological innovations, the technological boom that Japan is starting to invest in are starting to become obvious in the day-to-day lives of the people. Another really clear example of this is that you never really have to look people in Japan in the eyes because everybody at all times are looking down 100% at their cell phones. The fifth and final shocking difference between my time in Lima, Peru, and my time here in Japan has to do with the language barrier. So no matter where you go here in Japan, you're going to have to deal with this language barrier if you do not speak fluent Japanese. So one of the things that we all know, if you've lived in the United States, you're going to have at least some exposure to the Spanish language, whether it's because you heard Spanish music on the radio, whether it's because you attended school with native Spanish speakers, or maybe you even had opportunities to visit Spanish-speaking countries during your childhood. So that made visiting and living in a place like Peru much easier than living and visiting a place like Japan. I have had absolutely zero exposure to the Japanese language, and I struggle with basic things like saying hello and goodbye. And that makes it much more difficult to integrate into the culture and to become more and more familiar with the cultural norms of Tokyo and Japan overall. So those are my top 5 shocking cultural differences that I've experienced while living here in Japan. Overall, I would say it's a wonderful place to live. I would encourage each and every person to visit Japan because they have a plethora of things to do. And I do believe that you will have a wonderful time and you will have an unforgettable experience. But what I will say in conclusion, that for me, Lima, Peru is a much better fit for my lifestyle as a digital nomad. And it is a place that I very much look forward to getting back to. So that's pretty much all I had to share for this video. If you're interested in hearing more about my time in Japan in future videos, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you next week in my next video.